Hey everyone, welcome back to another update. So today's update is going to be relatively interesting because I really just want to talk about a situation that recently just came out. And it's recently about basically the fact that there are now several people, and this applies specifically to about 1 million people. So this is not a small town kind of local situation. This is actually a pretty relatively big situation where essentially there are several people now that are receiving letters from the unemployment department about how they might even potentially now have to repay some of their unemployment benefits because of a situation that just recently came out. Now, if you have already received the notice, the really good news is that there is a way around this of how to potentially solve this. So that is the great news that we're going to talk about. And if this has not yet happened to you, then that is really great news, because at least it means that right now you are protected from it. But for maybe potentially people that will be getting a notice in the future, I figured this is probably something very important to know, just for the sake of protection. And even more specifically, the protection of, we're talking about potentially thousands and thousands of dollars. So hopefully we can manage to continue to stay, or simply put is to keep the unemployment that we have already been collecting, which for many people we're talking about thousands and thousands and thousands of dollars. But that's really what I just want to talk about in today's video. Everything about what's been going on, if you're just interested, if it applies to you, or if you're just maybe a little bit concerned about what's going on, and then the actual solution, how to solve it. So with that being said, we're gonna get started, but as always, the same exact story, as always, the same drill. Consider smashing the like button. If you guys enjoy videos like this, consider subscribing, hitting the bell, and as always, feel free to comment any questions, personal thoughts, maybe your personal thoughts about the current situation of having to repay it back. So with that being said, let's get this video started. So maybe to just start a little bit about the background story to why this is actually physically happening, is really just about the fact that there are now, as many of you guys know, so many changes that have been happening with unemployment, that essentially one of the big changes is that there are many states right now that are trying to essentially just change up the requirements of what you need in order to physically get onto the unemployment program, but also to potentially, just simply put, is to greater enforce the rules that have already existed. So basically the story behind it is that there are many rules that have actually been existing for quite a while right now, since just the existence of unemployment. But the story is that during the pandemic they were a lot loose about it, so that was the reasoning for why many people were able to get approved, and thankfully, they were able to get approved to be on the unemployment. But now what they want to do is that they just want to even greater enforce the situation, and this actually even applies to the PUA program. So it's really that it's because of that reason. What they're really trying to do is that not only are they trying to make it so that it's basically, they're trying to increase the strictness to get onto unemployment, but they also want to backdate when they actually physically enforce this to when the pandemic actually started. So that is really the background story to why this is happening. So it's not just about like future claimants, it actually has to do with backdating from people that actually got onto the unemployment program ever since pretty much just 2020, which is wild. We're about like a year and a half from when the pandemic really started, and almost 2 years actually, if you've been following this since it was actually only in Asia. So if you're like me that follows international news. So the story is that because they want to enforce this, but they also want to backdate the actual enforcement to back then, that is the reason why right now there are actually supposedly many people, and even more people, specifically about 1 million people, that's the estimated amount, that will be getting or have already received a letter asking them to potentially repay back some of the unemployment benefits that they've already received. Now the great news is that now that we do know the background story to why this is actually physically happening, there is a solution around this, even if you're someone that hopefully has not yet received the letter, but maybe to protect yourself in case that you actually do end up receiving that letter. And if you do end up receiving that letter, or have already received that letter, the big thing what's going on is that the big change that they really made inside of the requirement is that they just pretty much want to make it more strict in terms of what they physically look at to be able to get onto the unemployment program in general. So what they're really looking for, maybe the long story short, is that they just want greater proof of income, that you basically were making money and at least trying before you actually physically got on to the unemployment program. So what you pretty much have to do is that if you do end up receiving that letter, or if you have already received that letter, is that you just have to simply put submit documents, send them over to either the address, so a physical like dated address and like a physical letter, or through email or through an app, depending on the state that you're in. If you do end up getting that notice, it will probably give you the instructions about what you have to physically, or where to actually physically send the documents to. Now, in terms of what actual documents you have to submit, this is a pretty great outline about the typical documents or examples of documents that you can use to pretty much just prove past income. Just maybe for anyone that maybe might be just watching this on a small screen, so I know, sometimes just in case if it's a little bit hard to see, pretty much the examples that they really have is that you have to essentially just either submit your tax returns. This is especially true for people that are on the PUA program, because many of them, they kind of have to write out many parts of their taxes on their own. So examples of this could be like the 1040, so 1040, and then also the Schedule C or F for people that are self-employed, which is most people that are on PUA, or just any other kind of document that you can potentially have to just show how much money you made. For some people, this could be a W-2. If, say, for example, you're a contractor. I'm also actually, interestingly, both a contractor and someone on a 1040, so I kind of totally feel it there. You can either submit your paychecks, receipts, business records, contracts, invoices. Essentially, just pretty much the bottom line is that if it's a document that reflects or shows money that you made that came in before the pandemic to show that you were at least actively working during that time, then the great news is that you can potentially submit it. And you don't even have to submit multiple documents. As long as you just have one of these, then that's probably pretty much what you'd really just need to satisfy. Now, of course, if you have multiple documents, then that's probably even better, because then it just feels a little bit more secure, because it means that you have options. Now, in terms of specific due dates about how long you have, the general typical timeline is that it depends on the state, but I do know in California, and I only use California because they're actually the state where more than half of the people that have had this happen has happened in California. I believe the specific time frame is that if you were someone that got onto the unemployment in 2021, so this specific year, particularly sometime from January 30th 2021 to the present moment, then they're probably going to give you right around 21 days. Of course, there's again a little bit of variation depending on your state. And if you are someone that has been on the unemployment program, or were on the unemployment, like you first joined unemployment back in 2020, so anything from when the pandemic started, the good news or the brighter news is that they're going to be giving you guys right around 90 days, or basically specifically about 3 months, to potentially send in your documents to kind of waive out this requirement. So hopefully you guys can stay, or just simply put, keep the unemployment money that you have already been collecting, or that you had while the unemployment program was still an active thing. Now, in terms of what states that this currently applies to, it's currently definitely happening in California, and it's starting to happen in Washington. And I believe is that at this current time period, there's a lot of talks in many other states about potentially having this happen yet, but so far those are really the two big states that have this currently happening. Of course, it's predicted and speculated that more might potentially go or have it or start to do this, which is why I figured that it's probably pretty important to hopefully know in the case that it really does end up happening. Now, on a flip note, I do maybe want to just insert something that I know applies to some people, but if maybe you happen to be someone who's the reverse, say for example you're actually now someone that actually just for all sorts of reasons, it could have been because of the identity check, the ID me, the fraud cases, just the delay depending on the state that you're in. If essentially you are the reverse, actually, where maybe the unemployment systems actually owe you money, let's say you're actually someone that actually was underpaid your unemployment benefits, the good news is that you actually can still receive those payments. It might be a little bit difficult depending on the state that you're currently in, but it's definitely worth it to still try to go for it, especially before the year ends, because we still have 1 month, so that is the bright news. But what you pretty much just want to do is that you want to try to find the contact information of the unemployment office. The phone number probably works best. Sometimes, in most cases, there might even be multiple phone numbers that can reach the unemployment offices. You're going to just collect all of the phone numbers. You're going to try to call them. You're going to try to rotate them. A big recommendation is just to mix up the times, because typically different states also vary in the busyness within within throughout the day of how easy it is to physically reach them. And then hopefully if you're able to connect, really beyond that is really just about explaining your situation, having all the information ready, and hopefully they can potentially now start to at least process. At the very least, I think it's definitely worth it to at least try, because we could be talking about several hundred, if not for some people, even something in the thousands range. But beyond this is that that's what I really just wanted to share in today's update. So hopefully if you guys found that relatively insightful, and haven't done so, consider smashing the like button, consider subscribing, hitting the bell. And as always, feel free to comment any questions, personal thoughts, especially about what's been happening, because this is actually pretty recent. The Washington situation actually just came out just about 2 to 3 days ago. So it is actually a very, very new thing, and it's anticipated to potentially come to even more. Hey everyone, welcome back to another update. So today's update is going to be relatively interesting because I really just want to talk about a situation that recently just came out. And it's recently about basically the fact that there are now several people, and this applies specifically to about 1 million people. So this is not a small town kind of local situation. This is actually a pretty relatively big situation where essentially there are several people now that are receiving letters from the unemployment department about how they might even potentially now have to repay some of their unemployment benefits because of a situation that just recently came out. Now, if you have already received the notice, the really, really good news is that there is a way around this of how to potentially solve this. So that is the great news that we're going to talk about. And if this has not yet happened to you, then that is really, really great news, because at least it means that right now you are protected from it. But for maybe potentially people that will be getting a notice in the future, I figured this is probably something very important to know, just for the sake of